The forest seemed to hold its breath. The sun, once bright, now filtered through the treetops in broken beams, illuminating a clearing filled with dust, blood, and silence. In the center, a colossal gorilla stood motionless, hunched over the ground as if bearing the weight of a world in ruins. In its arms, the small body of its calf lay between its enormous hands, fragile, soiled, and in pain. All around, the air was filled with fear and awe. A group of rangers and researchers watched from afar, unwilling to approach. The sound of helicopters vibrated in the background, mingling with the distant echo of roars that still lingered over the valley. The ground revealed the scene of a savage battle. There were deep claw marks in the damp soil, pieces of torn leaves, broken rocks, and a trail of blood that disappeared among the trees. Everything pointed to the confrontation that had just taken place. The lion, now wounded and staggering, had disappeared toward the river, leaving behind a trail of destruction and the body of its own defeat. The gorilla, however, did not pursue. Its sole attention was focused on the small creature it held against its chest. Protective instinct overrode any impulse for revenge. The cameraman's cameras shook. None of them could believe what was before their eyes. The image of a giant gorilla, a force of nature, kneeling amidst the devastation, protecting her baby from the claws of a lion, was something that transcended animal logic. There was emotion, purpose, and something more, a pain reminiscent of human grief. The winds that swept through the clearing carried burnt leaves and dust, as if the forest itself were mourning. The surroundings seemed frozen in time. Helicopters circled overhead, casting shifting shadows over the scene. A veterinarian tried to approach with a tranquilizer, but the gorilla roared softly, a silent warning for no one to interfere. The sound echoed through the trees, reverberating like a low, mournful note. It was a sound of loss, but also of triumph. He had faced the king of the jungle and won. The crowd that gathered around, villagers, environmentalists, reporters, kept their distance, watching a spectacle of power and sacrifice. Some wept, others simply watched, unable to comprehend the intensity of that moment. The lenses captured every movement, every heavy breath of the animal. It was as if all life in the forest converged on that point, the moment when the beast became a symbol, the predator transformed into a hero, and instinct gained a soul. The calf was breathing shallowly, but it was breathing. Its small body trembled with fear and exhaustion. The gorilla wrapped it protectively, hiding it from the world, as if the shelter of its arms were the only safe haven left. The sky was beginning to cloud over, and the warm midday air was replaced by a cold wind that stirred the treetops. A distant clap of thunder announced the beginning of the rain. The first drops fell onto the bloodied ground, slowly washing away the traces of the struggle. Water ran down the gorilla's shoulders, forming trails of mud that mixed with the dried blood. He lifted his face to the sky for a moment, as if challenging the heavens to question his pain. The scene, captured by dozens of cameras, would become a worldwide headline. The news would spread like wildfire. Gorilla saves her baby monkey, trapped in the claws of a ferocious lion. The images would spread across social media, provoking shock and emotion. Experts would debate the animal's behavior for months, unable to explain the rationale behind such courage. But in that moment, none of that mattered. The forest breathed again, and the gorilla stood alone at the epicenter of the silence. Behind him, the lion's body disappeared into the shadows, swept away by the river's current. The jungle, witness to the conflict, seemed to resume its natural course, but something had changed. The boundary between instinct and feeling had been broken. The guards looked at each other hesitantly until one of them lowered his weapon and gestured to retreat. No human dared interfere. Nature had spoken more powerfully than any law or word. The gorilla, with slow, heavy steps, walked to a large rock in the center of the clearing and sat there, holding the calf close to his body. The raindrops increased, falling in a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat from the sky. Slowly, the camera zooms in on the animal's gaze. Its eyes reflect pain, love, and exhaustion, a rare fusion of brutality and tenderness. The shot freezes, The sound of rain intensifies. The voiceover enters softly, almost whispered, echoing like a memory. But how did we get to this point? The image fades to black, and the sound of tribal drums begins to pulse, marking the temporal transition. The past prepares to be revealed, a past where the harmony of the jungle hid the seeds of chaos, and where every glance between the gorilla and her calf carried the foreshadowing of an inevitable tragedy. The screen fades, leaving only the sound of a heartbeat. The viewer feels the weight of the moment, without fully understanding it, but aware that they are witnessing the beginning of something grand, a story of courage, love, and the sheer savagery that sometimes merges with humanity. And then, with the distant echo of the lion's roar fading into the forest, the cycle closes, the end that becomes the beginning. Days before the tragedy, the forest lived in balance. Dawn in the mountains brought a golden light that pierced the fog and caressed the treetops, transforming each leaf into a green jewel. The birds began their ritual song. The rivers whispered among the rocks, and the wind carried the scent of life. In the heart of this paradise, the gorilla lived with her calf, a small, curious monkey exploring the world with eyes full of discovery. The giant moved calmly, his imposing presence contrasting with the gentleness of his gestures as the little one approached. He protected him with the same zeal with which the jungle guards its secrets. On the banks of a stream, the calf played with pebbles, imitating his father, while the gorilla watched attentively, lying on a fallen log. It was a picture of peace, the kind of tranquility that deceives before the storm. Further ahead, far from the clearing, the first signs of imbalance began to appear. A distant roar echoed from the hills, a sound that didn't belong there. The lion, driven from his former domain by hunters and hunger, had migrated north, to a land that wouldn't accept him, but which he would dominate by force. Smaller animals changed their ways, birds flew higher, and even the winds seemed to carry an invisible warning. Human researchers stationed nearby noticed subtle changes in the species' behavior. Cameras captured unusual nocturnal movements, and the number of predator confrontations increased. One researcher commented that the jungle seemed restless. However, for the gorilla, the world was still simple: protect, feed, and teach. At dusk, the sky became a mirror of colors. The gorilla climbed with his calf to a high cliff, overlooking the vastness of the forest. There he watched the horizon as if he were an ancient guardian. The little one imitated his gestures, trying to appear large, awkwardly beating his hands against his chest. His father watched him, and for the first time, something disturbed him. The distant sound of breaking branches echoed through the valley. It wasn't the faint rustling of deer, nor the sound of wind. It was the sound of heavy, measured footsteps, as if something large were moving in the shadows. In the following days, the signs multiplied. Huge footprints were seen near the riverbank. Carcasses of wild boars and antelopes appeared abandoned, some still fresh. The forest was divided between silence and alert. The gorilla sniffed the air, recognizing the scent of danger, but tried to keep the little one away from the tension. Still, instinct made him remain vigilant. One afternoon, as the baby gorilla played near the stream, the gorilla noticed something strange. The birds that normally roosted in the tallest trees had disappeared. The air seemed thicker. The wind had died. Suddenly, a deep roaring sound rang through the valley, long and hungry. The river waters trembled, and the little monkey froze, staring in the direction of the sound. His father pulled him close, and for a few seconds, nothing more was heard. It was a harbinger of things to come. That night, the sky was bright with lightning. The gorilla didn't sleep. Sitting on a rock, he watched the horizon, attentive to every movement. The cub slept against his body, peaceful, oblivious to the fear that lurked within. In the darkness, wild eyes watched from afar, reflecting the moonlight. The lion was approaching. His presence was a living shadow, moving among the bushes, studying, waiting. The next morning, researchers found the security cameras tampered with. The footage showed the gorilla in a protective stance, beating its chest and staring at something out of view. A roaring sound interrupted the footage, followed by static. No one imagined that these scenes would mark the beginning of a silent war between titans. While humanity recorded the forest with scientific curiosity, the real dramas were unfolding beyond human reach. The gorilla, now more restless, began to lead the calf to higher ground, away from the river. It was as if he sensed the enemy coming from the earth and from hunger. Peace was no more. The wind blew harder, kicking up dust, as if nature itself was trying to warn. The calm was over. At the end of the day, sunset dyed the sky red. The gorilla stopped before the golden immensity and closed his eyes for a moment. His heavy breathing revealed both fatigue and intuition. Behind the mountains, the lion moved with calculated steps, his body tense, his gaze fixed, guided by the instinct that would make him challenge the only being capable of facing him. Then fate began to weave itself silently. Every tree, every river, and every shadow in the forest seemed to know that something grand was about to happen. The natural cycle was preparing for a violent rupture. The chapter ends with the gorilla and her calf falling asleep under the moonlight, surrounded by familiar night sounds. The camera slowly pulls back, revealing the silhouette of the lion in the background, watching from afar, motionless, like a dark promise. The wind picks up again, bringing the distant echo of the roar that would soon change everything. The false peace was over. The awakening had begun. Dawn brought a cold, silent light. The gorilla awoke with a restless heart, the air heavy and instinct screaming in his chest. The calf was not at his side. The patch of earth where he usually slept was empty. The leaves crumpled and the scent still fresh. In a matter of seconds, tranquility turned to despair. He stood abruptly, sniffing the air, traversing the clearing with long strides and rapid breathing. The forest, once familiar, now seemed like a hostile maze. The birds fled in flocks, and the silence among the ancient trunks turned to a dull hum. It was then that he found his first clue. Small footprints interrupted by deep marks, too wide to belong to any primate. Claws had torn the ground, and between the tracks, tufts of golden fur gleamed in the pale morning light. With each step, the truth became more cruel. The lion had been there. The gorilla followed the trail, advancing through the dense vegetation. The smell was strong, a metallic odor of blood mixed with the damp aroma of the earth. His heart beat irregularly. He moved with precision, silently, like a shadow chasing a ghost, until he reached the riverbank. The mud was churned, the marks of struggle spread for meters, and the water ran murky, stained a faint red. In the center of the current, something floated for a moment, a small bracelet made of natural fibers that the calf had tied to his wrist. Seeing it being dragged away, the gorilla understood that the enemy had crossed the border. Meanwhile, in the nearby hills, researchers analyzed nighttime camera footage. The shaky images showed the gorilla's silhouette suddenly awakening, staring at something out of frame. A second later, a flash and a deafening roar filled the screen. The sound of the fight reverberates in the recording, followed by monkey cries echoing through the forest. The video ends in static. Even faced with the evidence, some persisted in denying that the encounter between the two beasts had ever occurred. They claimed the marks could have been caused by another animal, that it was impossible for the lion to have reached that altitude. The truth, however, was already pulsing through the forest. The gorilla traveled for hours, searching for new tracks, crossing areas he had never explored before. His body was sweating, his chest heaving, but his gaze remained unwavering. Along the way, he encountered abandoned carcasses, deer tapirs, small torn-apart prey. It was the trail of a predator driven by hunger and the instinct for dominance. The wind carried the lion's scent, mixed with the fear of other creatures. The entire jungle seemed to bow before the invader's presence. As the sun began to set, the gorilla reached a wide clearing, surrounded by gnarled trees. In the center, fresh blood stains formed an irregular pattern on the ground. The smell was unmistakable. He fell to his knees, slamming his hands into the earth, letting out a roar that sent the birds flying in panic. It was a sound that blended fury, pain, and despair. Over the next few days, he continued his tireless search. With each new trace, his certainty grew. The calf was still alive but in danger. Even so, the loneliness intensified. Other gorillas moved away from him, smelling the violence and blood. Females hid their own calves. Males watched him from afar, suspicious, fearing his presence would attract the predator to the group. He became an exile within his own species. The nights were long. Sitting under the trees, he heard distant sounds, cracks, roars, muffled screams. Sometimes he imagined the little one calling out to him in the darkness. Pain turned to strength, and strength to promise. He would not rest until he found it. Meanwhile, the humans returned to the site to collect new footage. They found fresh lion footprints and video fragments showing the exact moment the beast dragged something small between its tusks. The evidence was irrefutable. However, the gorilla no longer needed confirmation. He could feel the enemy's trail etched into his own skin. The forest began to react. Prey fled in droves, natural sounds faded, and a dense silence hung over the territory. The balance had been broken. The lion, realizing the gorilla was following him, began to hunt him too. It was an invisible war, where every step, every breath, could decide their fate. At dawn, under the light rain, the gorilla reached a high rock and surveyed the valley. Far below, the golden glow of a body moving among the trees betrayed the enemy. The lion was dragging something with it. The gorilla felt his heart race, his veins pulsate. Instinct pushed him forward, but fear made him retreat. He knew he could not act without strength, without strategy. The confrontation would be fatal if it came too soon, so he retreated into the shadows, biding his time. He watched from afar, studying every movement, every turn, every trail left. The hunter now became what he feared most, a patient creature shaped by loss. The rain stopped, the sky cleared again, and the cycle began again. But something inside the gorilla had changed. His once serene gaze now burned like embers. His pain had transformed into purpose. He was no longer just a father. He was a soldier of the jungle, a silent force about to awaken. Deep in the forest, the lion's distant roar echoed once more, carrying the sound of the wind. The gorilla clenched his fists, feeling the ground vibrate beneath his feet. The jungle watched in silence as a storm gathered. The isolation was now complete, but within this silence, something new was born, the conviction that wild love, when wounded, is more dangerous than any beast. And so, the gorilla prepared for the inevitable confrontation that fate would demand. The battle had already begun, even before the first blow. The next morning dawned with an unsettling silence. The mist covered the valley like a thick blanket, and every moving branch seemed to hide a gaze. The gorilla awoke exhausted, his body covered in scars, and his soul consumed by the relentless search. There was no longer any fear, only an unshakable instinct that kept him going. He knew the lion was still near. The air betrayed the metallic scent of its presence, and the birds, instead of singing, fled. Moving through the shadows, the gorilla began tracking his enemy with almost supernatural precision. Every leaf stepped on, every scratched trunk, every mark in the mud became a clue. Time had lost its meaning. Day and night blended into a single sequence of vigilance and waiting. He followed in silence, his gaze fixed on the footprints that disappeared and reappeared at irregular intervals, until, deep in the forest, he found something that made his heart race, a small makeshift den surrounded by bones and hunting remains. Among them, a natural fiber toy, the same one the calf had carried in its first days of life. The gorilla approached slowly. The cub's scent was still there, faint but real. Pain gave way to fury. He realized the lion had turned this place into his den. On the ground, scratches marked the rock in circles, as if the cub had tried to escape. The giant took a deep breath, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Suddenly, a cracking sound in the trees broke the silence. The gorilla spun around quickly. In the shadows, something was moving. Not the lion, but a group of small primates watching from afar. They were younger gorillas, led by a female with a steady gaze. She approached slowly, fearlessly. She recognized his pain and in a way shared it. The group had lost cubs to the same predator. Their collective instinct united them. For the first time, the gorilla was no longer alone. For the next few hours, the valley became a viewing platform. The group spread out strategically, tracking the lion's every move. As the day progressed, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The predator hunted during the early morning hours and returned to the cave at dawn. The gorilla waited for sunset. The forest, tinged with orange hues, seemed to silently watch the birth of revenge. As darkness fell, the group moved toward the confrontation. The air was dense, heavy, vibrating with primal energy. The sound of crickets ceased, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As they approached the clearing, they saw the lion, enormous, its fur stained with dried blood, and its eyes glowing like two embers. It was alone, but its presence dominated the space. The gorilla advanced without hesitation. The first impact was deafening, muscle against muscle, flesh against flesh. The ground shook, leaves flew, tree trunks snapped. The struggle between the two forces seemed to make the entire jungle vibrate. The lion attacked with sharp claws and fangs, while the gorilla used brute strength and instinctive intelligence. The other primates surrounded the battlefield, screaming, throwing rocks, trying to distract the enemy. For a moment, the lion staggered. Hope grew. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the young gorillas, overcome with terror, fled, and in its rush it revealed the position of the others. The lion, taking advantage of the chaos, charged at the group, tearing the air with fury. The plan had been compromised. The lead gorilla reacted desperately. He grabbed the lion by the shoulders, twisted his body, and threw him against a rock. The impact shook the ground. The predator roared, wounded but not defeated. He rose, more violent than before. The fight continued with increasing fury, a duel between king and titan. The lion leaped at the gorilla, striking his shoulder with its claws. Hot blood flowed, but the giant resisted. With a well-aimed blow, he knocked him down and pinned him to the ground. Then fate intervened. Amidst the tumult, the faint sound of a cry echoed from within the cave. The gorilla turned his face, and there was the calf, hidden behind the rocks, trembling, alive. The sight slowed time. The lion seized the moment of distraction and attacked again, tearing open his arm. The blow could have been fatal, but the pain only rekindled the dormant strength. With a roar that shook the forest, the gorilla pushed the lion back and struck him so violently that the beast fell stunned. The ground was covered in dust. The gorilla, bleeding and trembling, advanced for the last time. The battle ended with the lion surrendered, defeated, its body sprawled among the roots. Silence fell over the jungle. The other primates approached slowly. The gorilla knelt before the cave, stretching out his arms. The calf ran to him, curling up against his chest. The moment was pure and devastating, a reunion of life and death, strength and fragility. The jungle seemed to breathe again, but not all was resolved. The young man, who had fled during the battle, overcome with shame and fear, set off and alerted human hunters to the fighting site. Within hours, helicopters circled the valley, drones captured images, and the newly won peace became a spectacle. The gorilla, exhausted, stared at the horizon, unaware that the greatest danger yet would come not from the lion's claws, but from the curiosity of humans. The camera slowly pulls back, showing the giant and his cub in the moonlight, surrounded by the echoes of the forest, now silent in reverence. The turning point had been achieved, the enemy vanquished, love restored, but the real battle, the one involving survival under human gaze, had just begun. The jungle was silent. The wind blew gently, carrying with it the promise of a new confrontation, not between predators, but between instinct and civilization. The gorilla rose once more, aware that his fight for life and peace was not yet over. Dawn revealed a transformed forest. The leaves still trembled with the echo of the previous night's battle, and the air carried the smell of wet earth, blood, and smoke. Above the canopy, helicopters streaked the sky, casting beams of light onto the clearing where the gorilla stood, exhausted, with the calf in his arms. His breathing was heavy, rhythmic like the sound of a distant drum. The victory had been costly. The lion's body lay inert among the twisted roots, and the silent jungle seemed to mourn and celebrate at the same time. The first humans arrived before the sun had fully risen. They were rangers, biologists, cameramen, and reporters. The whirring of propellers mingled with the sound of radios and muffled shouts of instructions. The gorilla watched from afar, lying on a moss-covered rock, holding the calf close to his chest. He didn't understand the men's intentions, but he sensed that his peace was once again threatened. The drones flew too close, flying low, capturing every detail of his scarred face. Humanity watched, fascinated, as the scene quickly spread across the world. The king of the jungle, defeated by a father who fought beyond instinct, guided by something greater: love. The phrase that would echo across every headline was already being born there. Gorilla saves her baby monkey trapped in the claws of the ferocious lion. The human group advanced slowly, surrounding the clearing. A veterinarian knelt, opening a syringe of tranquilizer. The gorilla sensed danger. His gaze hardened, and the air around him seemed to still. The calf stirred in his arms, and he held it carefully, protecting it as if it were the last living thing that mattered. The helicopters intensified their noise. Reporters murmured, cameras flashed incessantly. Tension reached a fever pitch. Then something changed. One of the rangers, the same one who had accompanied the gorilla weeks earlier during routine observations, recognized the little one. He knew how much the animal had been studied, knew it wasn't naturally aggressive. He raised his hand and ordered silence. The engine slowed, the noise ceased. For a moment the forest breathed again. The rain began to fall, a fine mist washing away the dust, blood, and fear. The gorilla raised his gaze to the sky, allowing the drops to run down his face. It was as if accepting the world's judgment with dignity. Slowly, he took one step forward, then another, until he stood before the men. The calf, weak, was breathing heavily. The veterinarian approached hesitantly and held out his arms. The gorilla hesitated. A second of absolute silence separated the past from redemption. Then, with an unexpected gesture, he placed the little one on the ground before them. The moment was historic. The calf was rescued, wrapped in a cloth, while the gorilla remained motionless, watching with eyes that knew its mission was complete. The cameras captured the scene with almost sacred clarity. The wild father handing over what he loved most to the care of the one he had so often destroyed. The contrast between strength and surrender, between instinct and reason, between nature and humanity, was embodied there, under the rain. The humans stepped aside, giving him space. The gorilla, staggering, took one last look at the little one and unhurriedly turned. He walked through the trees, slowly disappearing into the mist. No sound followed him. The forest parted for him, as if recognizing his nobility. With each step, the weight of pain mingled with the lightness of freedom. He had won, but he knew that no victory was without scars. Hours later, video of the event would spread across the planet. Millions would watch the footage of the gorilla confronting the lion and then protecting the calf with gestures of human tenderness. Animal behavior experts would be divided between scientific explanations and emotional statements. Some would say it was merely instinct. Others would assert there was something more to it, a wild consciousness that the civilized world had forgotten. In the following days, the calf recovered under human care. The doctors named him Hope. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, the gorilla continued his solitary journey, relearning to live in silence. His wounds healed slowly, and the sound of the rivers once again guided him. He no longer looked back, but with every beat of his heart pulsed the memory of what he had fought to protect. The sun, setting over the horizon, illuminated the mountains with hues of gold. On a high rock, the gorilla stopped and surveyed the green expanse, as if watching over the entire world. A gentle wind blew, bringing the distant echo of human laughter and the fragile sound of a calf calling. He closed his eyes, The jungle finally was at peace. Even in the forest, where the law is the roar and survival is the rule, there are hearts that love, fight, and bleed for what is sacred. Instinct may start the battle, but it is love that decides the end. The screen fades to black. The sound of the river fills the silence. In white letters, the final message appears. If stories of courage and wild love move you, sign up to experience the next chapter of nature in its purest form.